A few years ago, I had what most people would call the dream, a steady marriage, a daughter who adored her parents, and a rhythm to my days that felt comfortable and safe. I'm 34. My husband, Michael, was the kind of man who made people say, "Wow, you're lucky." He worked long hours in IT, but he never missed bedtime when he could help it. He'd build blanket forts, read silly voices for Emma, and somehow always show up when the little stuff needed doing. My best friend Rachel, who I'd known since college, used to tell me how fortunate I was. "Babe, guys like Michael don't come around every day," she'd say with a half-laugh. And I used to believe it. Our apartment in a quieter neighborhood in Seattle felt like home. It had a little backyard where Emma could play. We had routines, school drop-offs, grocery runs, lazy Saturdays at the park. Most nights ended with Michael doing the dishes and me putting the laundry away while we traded small talk. It was stable. It was steady. It was safe. And, to my shame now, at some point stability started to feel like a trap to me. I don't remember the exact moment it began, it was more of a slow erosion. Maybe I started noticing other women on the street, or I'd scroll through social media and see younger people taking risks, traveling, changing careers. Maybe boredom crept in, the quiet, dangerous boredom that settles into your bones. Whatever it was, I started to feel restless. I told Rachel about it. I'd complain about the sameness of my days and how the romance felt like a file in a cabinet labeled bold. She'd remind me that long-term relationships are built on the small things, not the fireworks. I nodded, but inside I started to crave a jolt, something that made me feel alive again. Part 2, the cafe, the smile, the first lie. That jolt came in the form of a guy named Tyler who worked at a small coffee shop near my office in Capitol Hill. At first he was harmless, a friendly barista who remembered my drink, who always had a joke or a story for the regulars. He had energy, loud, magnetic, easy charm. Compared to Michael's quiet, steady warmth, Tyler's presence felt electric. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. One afternoon, while serving my latte, he leaned in and said, "You've got an amazing laugh." It was casual, but it hit me like an unexpected breeze. I started taking my lunch breaks at that cafe for the chance to run into him. We had small, flirty exchanges at first, harmless, I told myself. The kind of banter you have when you've forgotten the lines in your marriage and want to feel noticed. He began texting me after work with silly memes, and I answered back. The texts became personal quickly. He'd ask how my day was, make a joke about work, send a ridiculous selfie. I told myself these messages were a harmless thrill. I told myself Michael didn't make me feel that rush anymore, he was practical, loving, dependable, the opposite of a spark. I told myself I deserved to feel seen. Small lies crept in like cat hair on a sweater. I'd tell Michael I was staying late at the office. I'd say I wanted some time to myself. I'd tell Rachel a truncated version of the truth when she asked where I'd been. I kept the receipts and the reservation texts in my pockets and convinced myself the deception was temporary. It was a compromise with my conscience I assumed I could reverse whenever I wanted. Part 3, Crossing Lines. Then came the lunch. Tyler asked me out for lunch one day outside the cafe. "Just lunch," he said in that casual way that made my heart skip. I said yes. That lunch felt like a secret world, the kind of conversation that hangs in the air after you smile too long. It felt electric. After that, we started seeing each other during the day more and more. Coffee turned into dinners, dinners into late-night drives where we talked about everything and nothing. I remember thinking how ridiculous it was that I was living a double life, and how unbelievably alive I felt. I made the first move. I kissed him. I remember how my stomach turned into butterflies and how I felt like I'd broken a rule I never knew I wanted to break. I told myself I was unhappy, that Michael took me for granted, that I needed this to remember who I was. All of those rationalizations were a thin veneer over a more selfish truth. I liked the way Tyler made me feel desirable. The guilt arrived in waves. I'd come home to Michael folding laundry, reading Emma a bedtime story, doing the 1,000 small things that make a house run. I would stand in the doorway, watching, both awed by his steadiness and disgusted with myself for undermining it. I told myself I could have both, stability at home and excitement on the side. That was the lie that carried me forward. Part 4, The Unraveling. Things snowballed faster than I'd imagined. Tyler's texts grew more intimate. He began to ask about my weekend, my feelings, my future, easy ways to make me think we had a connection deeper than the thrill. I began to spend more time at his tiny studio in Capitol Hill than at home. His place smelled like cheap cologne and coffee grounds. It had an unfinished, boyish charm that felt dangerous and new. There were nights when I'd come home late and pretend I'd just been at work. Sometimes I'd leave receipts in my bag by accident, and one night that mistake came back to haunt me. Michael found the receipt from Tyler's cafe. He asked me, quietly and plainly, who he was. His voice wasn't raised. There was no dramatic outburst, just that calm, steady hurt that seemed to cut deeper. I couldn't look him in the eye. I couldn't tell the truth. He said one sentence I'll never forget, "I trust you," and then walked away. That silence was worse than a scream. For a ridiculous instant, a selfish part of me felt relieved because the secret was out, but what washed over me after was not relief but the crushing weight of the life I had betrayed. Michael kept doing the things that mattered for our family. He kept working, showing up for Emma, keeping the household steady. But between us, a gulf opened. He barely spoke, and the silence made me feel smaller than I'd felt in years. I wanted to come clean. I wanted to beg him to forgive me. But when he finally sat me down and said, "I think we should separate," I found I had nothing to say. I nodded. Maybe, in a sense, I'd been waiting for permission to leave. Part 5, The New Family. We filed for divorce. Michael didn't fight hard, except on Emma's custody, where he asked for shared custody. I pushed for full custody because I told myself I was Emma's primary caregiver and that she'd be better off with me during the week. At the court hearing, Michael said only what was necessary. He signed the papers, packed up a few boxes, and moved out. I convinced myself I'd done him a favor. I told myself this was the start of a new life. Tyler moved in a few weeks later. For a while, it felt intoxicating, freedom, spontaneity, nights where we watched movies at 2 a.m., no schedules. Tyler was fun, charming, and a bit reckless, everything my life hadn't had in years. He made Emma laugh sometimes and brought small toys, which I took as proof that he could be part of a family. I told myself this was what I wanted, an unconventional, exciting new family. But the honeymoon faded fast. Tyler's erratic work history showed itself. Jobs lasted weeks or months before he quit or was let go. Excuses piled up. He borrowed money and never paid it back. He spent on things that didn't matter. In short order, he became more of a burden than a partner. The bills piled up, and I found myself covering for him more and more. The thrill that once made me feel alive turned to resentment. Emma began to notice. She asked why Tyler didn't go to work, why he was always on the couch. I lied. I said he was looking for something better. When he smashed our little sense of order with his immaturity and irresponsibility, I began to see the consequences of my choices reflected in my daughter's confusion. I'd taken her away from a stable home and dragged her into chaos. Part 6, The Collapse. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Tyler's unreliable income meant I drained my savings. He borrowed from shady people, and soon after, men started showing up at the house asking for him. I found myself terrified, keeping Emma away from the door and telling her to hide. Those knocks, those angry, impatient bangs, are a sound that will live in my mind forever. Tyler introduced me to pills as a way to calm down. "It'll help you sleep," he said. One pill became several, and before I knew it, I was using regularly to numb the panic and shame. It was my way of surviving the noises outside the door, the constant demands of debt collectors, and the growing estrangement from Michael. I felt numb in the way desperation makes you numb, as if any emotional reaction would break something irreparable. Emma began to distance herself. She'd spend more time in her room. She'd go to friends' houses and ask to stay there. She stopped sleeping in our bed and started clinging to any normalcy she could find. The guilt twisted with every step I took. I felt like a hollowed-out version of the mother I used to be. One night, after yet another heated argument where Tyler called me names for being too controlling or for trying to keep the house together, I found him passed out on the couch while Emma sat at the table doing homework alone. I finally snapped. "Help me," I cried, and he shrugged. He called me a babysitter. The word made me physically recoil. My daughter, my own small human, being treated like that lit something feral in me. I wanted to call Michael, to beg him to take Emma back. I wanted him to take her out of the chaos. But my pride and shame kept my phone in my bag. Part 7, The Consequences. I called Rachel. For once, her calm voice had an edge. She listened, then told me, bluntly, that I needed real help, rehab, a therapist, anything. I pushed back. I had responsibilities, I couldn't just leave. She said she loved me, but that she loved Emma too. If I refused help, she couldn't keep the secret. 2 days later, there was a knock. Michael stood at the door. Calm, measured, but resolute. He looked past me at the chaos, the dirt, the unpaid bills, and then found Emma. He packed a small bag for her and, with a quiet but firm voice said, "She's coming with me." I begged. I promised. I offered false solutions. He listened, sympathetic but unflinching. "I will do what's best for Emma," he said. He took her away. The house felt immediately empty and hollow. The weight of my choices smothered me in a way I'd never felt. I tried everything, calls, emails, apologies, but all I got was measured distance. A short email from Michael said, "Emma is doing well. Focus on yourself and getting better before we talk about visitation." It was the kindest, most painful message I'd ever received. He had compassion for me even then, but he also had to protect his child. Part 8, Picking Up the Pieces. After they left, everything hit at once. Debt collectors kept calling. I crashed at a friend's couch for a while because being in that house was unbearable. Rachel, who had been the one to help get Emma to safety, and who I'd begged and argued with, met with me. She told me she and Michael had found each other in the aftermath, not to spite me, but because they wanted stability for Emma. They had started seeing each other. Hearing that felt like salt in a wound. I finally started therapy and got into a support group. It was humiliating at first. Admitting you need help feels like pressing a reset button on your dignity. I entered detox under supervision, set up payment plans for bills, and cut contact with Tyler. When he finally left for good, part of me felt relief and another part felt grief for having believed his charm. Progress was slow and ugly. I had massive regrets, and every session felt like peeling off a layer of denial. Therapy forced me to face the selfishness that began this chain reaction, the boredom, the desire to feel seen, the refusal to appreciate what I had. I had to learn how to be reliable again, to show up when I said I would, to make small promises and keep them, to rebuild trust in tiny increments. Michael and Rachel are together now. They aren't gloating, and I don't think their relationship is about vengeance. They wanted to give Emma a stable environment, and they found a way to do it together. That stings. It's a daily ache. But it is also an honest consequence of choices I made. For now, my life is smaller and harder. I see a therapist weekly, go to meetings, kept custody arrangements involve supervised visits at first while I prove I can be stable. I'm paying off debt on a plan that feels painfully slow. I am learning how to be present, to pick up Emma's toys without being resentful, to answer the phone when she texts, to be the adult who follows through. It's a grind. It's humiliating to have to show proof of my progress to a judge, to my family, and to myself. But I'm doing it. I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I don't expect to go back to the life I wrecked. What I want is smaller and more concrete, to be a mother Emma can trust, to be someone she's proud of in time. I will always carry the shame of what I did. There's no erasing that. But I'm trying to turn it into something useful, into the motivation to never run from hard things again. If there's a takeaway from this wreckage, it's this: the shiny rush of excitement rarely replaces the slow warmth of genuine care. The predictable kindness of a solid partner is not boring, it's a foundation. Losing that because you wanted an adrenaline rush is a selfish, painful way to learn that lesson. I'm not asking for pity. I'm not even asking for forgiveness. I'm telling my story because I need to own it, and because maybe, in owning it, I might help someone else stop before they break something they can't put back together easily. For now, my days are about the small things: showing up on time to meetings, keeping promises to therapists and caseworkers, paying the bills I promised I'd handle, and building a life that one day might be worthy of Emma. I will keep you posted. If anyone reading this has climbed back from something similar, if anyone has concrete things that helped beyond therapy and 12-step meetings, please share. I need real strategies: how to rebuild trust with a child, how to stay sober when shame is a trigger, how to rebuild credit on a single paycheck, and how to be patient when progress is measured in months not days. Part 9: The reality of starting over. The first week after I moved out of the house didn't feel like a week. It felt like a long, unbroken stretch of hours that blended into each other, as if the clock itself was too exhausted to keep time. I was staying on my old friend's couch. Her name is Dana, and even though she never said I was a burden, I felt it every time I woke up and saw her tiptoeing around her own living room trying not to disturb me. The couch was lumpy, the air smelled faintly of laundry detergent and burnt coffee, and I kept waking up in the middle of the night, expecting Emma's little footsteps or Michael's soft murmur in the hallway. Instead, it was just silence. A silence that pressed against my chest until it hurt. Dana tried to make things easier. She'd leave a cup of coffee on the table before leaving for work, sometimes with a sticky note that said, "You can do this." But the truth was, I didn't feel like I could do anything. I wasn't used to being alone like this, not in a real, soul-deep way. Even when I'd gone to Tyler's place, even at the height of my recklessness, I always had someone validating me. Someone watching. Someone distracting me from myself. Now there was just me. The first few nights I kept reaching for the pills I didn't have anymore. My hands would shake, not from withdrawals, I detoxed, but from the instinct to numb discomfort the way I always had. But without pills, without Tyler, without Michael, without Emma, I had to face the grief that I'd run from for so long. It was like sitting in a dimly lit theater replaying every mistake I'd ever made, unable to walk out, unable to fast forward, unable to mute the soundtrack of my own shame. And every time I reached the part of the film where Michael quietly took Emma's hand and walked her out of my house, my chest tightened painfully. I had destroyed something sacred, and the enormity of that truth settled into my bones. But Dana's sticky notes, my therapist's insistence on compassion, Emma's drawings that I still carried in my purse, they were small anchors I held on to. Weak at first, but they kept me tethered to the idea that my story wasn't over yet. I wasn't done. And motherhood, even if damaged, fractured, and limited, wasn't over for me. Not if I fought for it. Part 10: Therapy, Honesty, and the Hardest Conversations. Therapy in the first month felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. My therapist, Dr. Hill, was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a soft voice that somehow made everything harder to confess. She didn't judge, didn't interrupt, didn't react dramatically. She just waited. And that waiting made me talk. "Why do you think you reached for Tyler?" she asked one afternoon. I hated the question. I hated myself for having an answer. Because I wanted to feel alive, I admitted. I wanted excitement. I wanted someone who made me feel like I wasn't disappearing. She nodded. And at what cost? Everything. The answer sat heavy in my chest, and I didn't say it aloud because the truth was too obvious to state. Michael's trust. Emma's stability. My own self-worth. The home we built. The life I didn't value until it was gone. Week after week, Dr. Hill pushed me a little deeper. Do you think you loved Tyler? I think I loved the idea of escaping myself. Do you still love Michael? I didn't answer for a long time. When I finally spoke, the truth cracked out of me like something breaking open. I never stopped. Some sessions were about Emma, how to rebuild a relationship when the foundation had collapsed. Others were about the pills, the triggers, the shame spirals, and how to breathe through cravings instead of giving into them. Dr. Hill taught me grounding exercises, journaling techniques, and ways to disrupt the internal monologue that kept telling me I wasn't worth saving. For the first time, I learned that remorse isn't the same as repair. Wanting forgiveness isn't the same as deserving it. Healing wasn't a race, and it wouldn't be linear. But at least I was moving forward, slowly, painfully, inconsistently, but forward nonetheless. Part 11, the first attempt to reach Emma again. 3 weeks after Michael's email, I worked up the courage to send another one. I typed and deleted my message at least 5 times before settling on something short and cautious. Hi Michael. I hope Emma's doing well. I'm in therapy, consistently, 3 times a week. I've stayed sober since detox. If she's comfortable, I'd really appreciate a short call or even a video chat. I'll respect whatever boundaries you set. I hovered over the send button for a full minute before tapping it. Hours passed. Then a day. Then 2. Every notification made my heart leap. On the 3rd day, he replied. Emma is doing well. She asks about you sometimes, but she's adjusting. Let's take small steps. I'll arrange a short supervised call later this week. Please continue therapy. Michael. Supervised. The word stung, but it was fair. More than fair. I had to rebuild not just trust, but safety. The call lasted 12 minutes. Emma sat on Michael's lap, shy at first. Her little voice was soft, hesitant. She told me about school, her new art project, and how she was learning to ride her bike without training wheels. She smiled a bit. She tugged at Michael's sleeve. It was bittersweet, joyful and painful tangled together. At the end of the call, she said, Mommy, can I show you my drawing next time? I swallowed a sob. Of course, sweetheart. I'd love that. I'm trying really hard to get better so I can be the best mom for you. She nodded as if she understood more than a child her age should have to. After the call ended, I cried harder than I had cried in months. Not out of despair, but out of the first real feeling of hope. Part 12, the letter I never sent to Michael. One night, Dr. Hill suggested I write a letter to Michael, not to send, but to express everything I'd held inside. So I wrote. Pages and pages poured out of me. I wrote about the early days of our marriage, how safe he made me feel, how grateful I was for the nights he stayed up when Emma had a fever, or the mornings he'd bring me coffee because he noticed I was exhausted. I wrote about my selfishness. My craving for attention. My boredom, the kind I never admitted because it felt petty and ungrateful. I wrote about Tyler, the thrill, the lies, the dissent, the chaos, the way I convinced myself I deserved something reckless just because I was tired of routine. I wrote about the moment Michael picked up Emma and walked out. How it hollowed me out. How it taught me, brutally, what stability actually means. I wrote that I didn't expect his forgiveness. That I didn't even expect kindness. But I hoped, someday, he might see I was trying. I folded the letter, tucked it into my journal, and cried until my eyes ached. Maybe Michael would never read it. Maybe he shouldn't. But writing it was the first time I forgave myself enough to try again. Part 13, a run-in with Tyler that changed everything. About 2 months after I'd moved out, I ran into Tyler. I was leaving a grocery store near Dana's neighborhood when someone called my name. That voice, once charming, now made my stomach twist. He looked worse. Thinner. Tired. Eyes darting around like he expected someone to follow him. "Damn," he said with a crooked smile. "Haven't seen you in a while." I froze. Part of me wanted to walk away. Another part of me needed closure. How are you?" I forced out. He laughed darkly. "Same old. People still after me, but whatever. You got any cash?" There it was. No affection. No remorse. No awareness of what he contributed to the implosion of my life, not that he owed me anything, not that he was solely responsible, but he didn't even pretend to care. "No, Tyler," I said softly. "I'm done." He scoffed. "You think you're better than me now?" I shook my head. "No. I think I'm finally better than the version of myself that needed you." For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt strong. Not invincible. Not healed. But strong enough to choose my future instead of repeating my past. I walked away. He didn't follow. Part 14, Slow Progress, Small Wins. Life didn't magically fix itself after that, but something shifted. I attended every therapy session. I stuck with sobriety meetings even on days I wanted to curl up and disappear. I picked up part-time freelance work to chip away at my debt. Dana's couch turned temporarily into a rented room in an older house with 3 other women, all of whom had their own messy backstories, their own paths to recovery. For the first time, I wasn't ashamed to be surrounded by people like me. We carried different mistakes, different wounds, but we were all trying. Really trying. Michael gradually extended the video calls. Emma showed me drawings, school projects, new toys. Sometimes she laughed with her whole chest again, the way she used to when she was little. I lived for those calls. Every one of them felt like a small redemption. Rachel was a different story. We weren't friends anymore. Probably wouldn't be again. But strangely, I didn't resent her the way I once did. She stepped up when I fell apart. Not for me, but for Emma. Michael needed help, and Rachel provided it. I could rage at that or accept it. Therapy taught me to choose acceptance, not because it feels good, but because anything else would suffocate me. Progress was slow. But it was progress. Part 15, The Hearing. 3 months after Michael took Emma, the court scheduled a hearing to review my progress. I was terrified. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, hands shaking, heart pounding. Michael arrived with Emma holding his hand. She waved shyly at me. He gave me a polite nod, neutral, respectful, distant. Inside, the judge reviewed my documents. Therapy attendance. Sobriety records. Drug test results. Letters from my therapist. Debt repayment plan. Proof of stable housing. Proof of steady part-time work. "Ms. Carter," the judge said, adjusting her glasses, "you've made significant progress." I'm encouraged. Tears pricked the back of my eyes. Michael didn't fight me. He didn't argue. He didn't try to punish me. He simply said, "I want what's healthiest for Emma." In the end, the judge approved weekly supervised in-person visitation, with potential for unsupervised time in the future pending continued progress. It wasn't everything I hoped for. But it was more than I deserved. As we left the courtroom, Michael walked up to me. "Thank you," I whispered. For not shutting me out completely." He nodded, looking tired but sincere. "I'm doing what's best for Emma. And I see you're trying. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. But acknowledgement." It meant more than he could ever know. Part 16, rebuilding a mother. The first supervised visit was awkward. Emma ran to me, hugging me tightly, and I breathed in the smell of her shampoo, her jacket, her little hands gripping my sweater. I wanted to bawl right there. But I held it together. We sat at a table in a community center while a family worker sat nearby, pretending not to listen. Emma showed me her drawings, told me about her schoolwork, and asked if we could bake cookies together next time. We colored, played with blocks, and talked about her bike. At one point she looked up at me and said, "Mommy, are you better now?" The question sliced through me. I cupped her cheeks and said, "I'm getting better every day, sweetheart. I promise." That visit lasted 2 hours. I cried the entire bus ride home. Not out of despair, but because I finally felt something I hadn't felt in so long. I was becoming a mother again. Part 17, a new start, not a new ending. Months passed. Supervised visits turned into longer visits. Dr. Hill wrote a letter recommending unsupervised time in the near future if I maintained my progress. I kept working, stayed sober, budgeted every dollar, and built a routine. Michael and I were not close. We would never be romantic again, that chapter was closed. Rachel remained in Emma's life. I still didn't know how to feel about that, but I no longer let it poison me. One evening, after a visit, Michael approached me outside the center. "You're doing well," he said quietly. I nodded, unsure how to reply. He hesitated, then added, "Emma's happy to see you. She talks about you a lot now." That sentence warmed something in me I thought had died. I wasn't forgiven. I wasn't restored to my old life. But I was earning my place in my daughter's life again. And that was enough. More than enough. Part 18, moving forward. I'm still living in the rented room. I'm still slowly paying off debt. I'm still healing. I still have cravings on stressful days. I still cry at night sometimes when a memory hits too hard. But I'm present. I'm grounded. I'm trying, in all the ways I never tried before. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day I'll date again. Maybe not. Maybe Emma will forgive me fully. Maybe she'll always carry a scar from what I put her through. Maybe my relationship with Michael will someday resemble friendship. Maybe it won't. But I will show up, for myself, for Emma, for the version of me I'm becoming. This time, not out of selfishness. But out of love. Real love. The kind that builds, not breaks.